What's up? How's it going,
What's
man?
up? What's going on, old man?
Not much. I actually just did a spaces like last night. It feels like it was a few minutes ago because literally it was right before I went to bed, like 7 hours ago, and now we got another one. So
Yeah, yeah. I gotta.
I'm officially a Twitter Spaces rat.
You're a spaceaholic. That's what you are. You're a space case. Yeah.
Exactly.
I had to put a clock on my desk with your time on it. So you should feel honored. I have a Hong Kong.
No way.
Yes.
Wow. Well, that's
Every time
amazing. I never.
I want to send
Wow.
you a message, I'm like, what time is it there? I don't want to send it in the middle of the night. Usually it's like 4 a.m. or something. I'm like, yeah, I'll hold off.
I don't know. I don't know if that says something good about how important I am or how bad at math you are.
No, no, it's how efficient I am. Why, I'm dealing with people in multiple time zones, so I don't want to have to do math in my head all the time.
That makes sense. Makes sense. Makes
So,
sense.
so I have a DAP clock, so you should be happy.
The dab clock. That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, yeah, man. So we gotta catch up. We got a lot of stuff to catch up on. Maybe not in this space, but afterwards. If we're you still are you still down to do our weekly meeting, or do you have something going on?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I'm down. I'm down. By the way, so in the end, I ended up recording the spaces, but we can always delete it or take it out, whatever. But
Oh,
just to let
I
you
think
know.
the default
Uh,
should be record it. Just record everything, and we can choose later to use it or not.
yeah, yeah. So I was just thinking for today, we could talk a little bit about, and it's a discussion we need to have anyways, right? Um, the future of all these properties that we're creating, like so the podcast, and maybe obviously we would like to talk a little bit about kind of your view for it and your background, etc. I think people will enjoy that, and also um, it's a discussion we need to have anyways. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that'd be great. Yeah, we can sort of kill multiple birds with one stone. Talk about what the plans are, and maybe get a little feedback from the audience at the same time.
Yep, yeah. There's
Yeah.
Crypto
Yeah,
Bob Ross is joining, so that's good. People are joining in.
so Crypto Rob, hey, Crypto Rob, Crypto Bob Ross. Look at that. That's awesome. That is cool. So, yeah, what were you guys talking about in the other space?
Oh, it was. There have been a lot of spaces over the last week about the topic of editions.
Mm.
So because there was a well, first of all, there have been a lot of NFT editions that have come to market over the last 2 3 weeks in the photography space, and then there was one particular case of someone who did an edition and a one-on-one of the same image, and then one of the collectors, prominent collector, sort of spoke out against it, and it wasn't, it didn't land well. And then that has sort of created a bit of a bit of interest in the topic. So there have been a lot of spaces on it. I think, yesterday we had what I hope is probably one of the last ones on the topic for a while because it's been too many. But it was a group of collectors, and I think it went okay. Actually, it was a good discussion. So if you feel like it, you can listen into the recording.
Yeah, yeah, you have to send me that one. Yeah, or send me where was it? Was it on this in the light account or in another one?
No, no, it was somebody else ran it. So
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
send it to you.
definitely
I'll
want to
send
check
it to
that out. Yeah, because that's yeah. I mean, I can see how that's a huge topic, and just the not only in the NFT world, is in the photography world at large. Period. Is
you. Yeah.
how to understand all this stuff and where the boundaries are, and yeah, yeah, it's part of the fun of being a settler, right?
Exactly, exactly, and it was very much along those lines, right? It's like people understanding that we need to experiment, and there's some people who are also from the traditional photography print world, chiming in and all that. So, um, but anyways, for today, should we get started? I think I can take a little bit of the host role today because I do want to, spend a little bit of time getting to know the man, Frederick Van Johnson.
My God.
So so we could do a little bit of reversal of roles today. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. I will do my best to sit in the passenger seat, which is hard for me, but I'll sit.
So I
But
mean, so why don't we start with, like, tell us your journey into photography, right? So how did you get started before the sort of the podcast and all that? Like when you first started, shooting, how did that come about, and what were you shooting? And tell us a little bit about your photographer story.
yeah, yeah, it's an interesting story. I started as a photographer in the United States Air Force as a combat photojournalist way back in the days of film. And yeah, I was stationed initially at Vandenberg, or sorry, Yokota Air Base in Tokyo, and went from there to Vandenberg Air Force Base here where I am now in California. And what we were doing initially at Yokota Air Base was, obviously a combat photojournalist, their job is war photography. But it's actually more than that. On the surface, it seems like it's just war photography or conflict documentation, but it really the job of a military photographer is really just the same in many ways as a civilian photographer, non-artistic, so photojournalism focused. And on Yokota Air Base, we were charged with shooting everything from autopsy photography to sports to portraiture to investigative, the whole nine yards. So our unit was basically tasked with we were the audio visual squadron. So whenever there was a need for some sort of audio visual thing, we got called to do it, and we had to do it to a level of professionalism. So I did
But
that for a couple of
so,
years and came to Vandenberg Air Force Base where we got to take pictures. My unit got to take pictures of launches, space launches and all the good things when, putting satellites into orbit and flying around in helicopters and doing all that good stuff. So, and then I left there. When I left Vandenberg Air Force Base, I separated from the military or was honorably discharged, and I came to Silicon Valley and joined. I think the first company I joined here was the San Jose Mercury News, and I was a content producer, photographer, and then I went from there to Yahoo, where I basically jumped into marketing and ran the marketing for Yahoo Computers and a bunch of other properties, and then Apple, then Adobe. So Apple, I was running the books and prints business for Apple, and I was on the Aperture and basically the Apple Aperture and Photos, or iPhoto at the time, team, and then went to Adobe and joined the Photoshop team and ran the marketing segment for professional photographers for Lightroom and Photoshop. So, so I know my way around a camera, I know my way around some marketing, I know my way around software. Now I'm trying to get my brain around this NFT stuff. So,
we'll get there. We'll get there. But I just wanted to go back to the military because I'm so interested in. So when you enlist, do you enlist for that, or do they sort of randomly kind of assign? How did you get into that particular unit? I mean, it seems a very specific thing to start with.
it is. It was a lottery win, man. So it was so the quick answer to your question is no. When you go in, I went as enlisted. So the rules are different for officers. So I went in as enlisted, which is we are stripes, we work for a living, we don't get to tell everybody what to do. And the make a long story short, basically you test in basically it's an aptitude test that you take, and based on the results of that test, then you get placed in a different position. So if it turns out you have an aptitude for writing or creativity or whatever, you get placed accordingly. If you have an aptitude for none of that, you get placed accordingly, right? So it turns out I had an aptitude for creativity and writing and all that stuff. So, and there was a need at the time for photographers. So it's a very simple formula. What are you most capable and what do you want to do? and what does the military need at the time? And, a number pops out and they're like, oh, we need photographers over there. And this guy can, has an aptitude for photography, train him as a photographer and put him over there. So that's what happened.
Wow, that's so cool. So you came in like, had you ever taken pictures? Like, did you know how to, anything about apertures and, how?
Zero. I knew nothing. I knew what a picture was. I was a consumer of fine photography, but I had no idea, what went into photography. When I and but when I was growing up, I wanted to do something creative. I thought I wanted to be a designer or a game designer or something like that. And I was actually going through the process of learning game design and all that. And it just turned out I didn't really like that. I didn't like the whole, I wanted more instant gratification than, than having to spend so much time world building. I wanted to be able to just click a shutter and make a world and then edit it. So yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting path.
So did they put you in a class? I mean, how did you? So tell us about some of that early days of learning to shoot. Right, what it was like.
Yeah, yeah, it was a combination of on-the-job training and classroom training. So on-the-job training, they dropped me into Tokyo, Yokota Air Base, gave me a bunch of gear. Basically, here are two camera bags. There's the gear room. Go get the stuff that you need, right? And just infinite Nikon gear in there, right? Go get the bodies and the strobes and whatever you want. And you check out what you want, and of course, you can go back and get things that you need for specific jobs. But then they give you what they call CDCs, career development courses, which is a stack of training that you go through, and your job during your on-the-job training window is to make it through certain modules by a certain time, and then you get tested on that. So that's phase one. And then phase two, so all that was basically book learning, or, understanding the physics of light, aperture, shutter speed, ISO, what film is, what silver halide is, all the different things, the science of photography and the science of light and composition and exposure, all that stuff. So you learn all that book learning. And then the phase two of that is, at least for me, was they send you to school. So I went to school in Denver, Colorado, and spent several weeks there learning how to actually shoot. So basically, you put the books away. Now you're out with seasoned photographers taking photos and processing and printing and rinse and repeat, literally, doing it over and over again. And then you go back to your base, and now you're, quote, a brand new photographer. You're minted and ready to do stuff. So yeah, and then from that point forward, that's basically the 101. But from that point forward, now you are learning, as you go. So we're all practicing photographers, learning new things every day, right? So you just basically get the foundation of what photography is and go from there. When you finish the training piece of it, most of the guys that I was with didn't have an idea of what their genre of photography was going to be. Like, what did they like to shoot? Because we had to shoot everything. We had to be great, or not great, but we had to be competent at being able to create portraits for, whenever the base needed portraits, we had to do those. We had to be competent at photojournalism, of course, and then everything in between, from the investigative stuff all the way down. I remember my first week at Yokota Air Base, they sent me to the base hospital to photograph an autopsy. So I go there and I had no idea, right? I go there, I get my camera, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna put it on A and click this button and hopefully I'll get an exposure. And I'm there just trying to keep my lunch down as they, the, this thing,
Oh man.
on the tray, take a picture of it. Okay, here's another piece. Take a picture of that, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is what I signed up for,
So how much of it is like sort of? I guess you're still in the military, so you have chain of command. You have like I don't know. I figure it'd be quite a big discipline in terms of how does it work. They give you a mission, soldier, you must do this, and then if is there disciplinary action if you don't? Like, what's the discipline around it? It must be a very different experience from the more artistic kind of, you know, um, assignments that most photographers get when they're starting?
Yeah, yeah, it is. That's a great question. It's different because from a you're right. It's subjective. Photography at its core is subjective and creative, right? But when you're doing documentary photography, your job isn't to let me show the viewer how creative I can be with this light beam. It's more of, hey, there's something that's going down over there, and I need to document it so that the person viewing this can understand the situation that was happening. So it's more technical and transactional versus artistic and subjective at that point. But then as you get better and better as a photographer, of course you can weave in your own subjective interpretation of a scene. We all do that by default, but the job is to document, right? Document, document, document. Understand storytelling, tell the establishing shot, the medium shot, the close-up shot, the beginning, the middle, and the end. You should, when you get assigned something, you should come away with a package or a group of photos that tell that story in those photos. And that's it. And if you don't get that, right, it's not like, okay, you missed a shot. You didn't get a shot of this little detail here, so you're going to jail or whatever. It's just more of, good work is rewarded with more good work, and bad work is rewarded with less work, right? So if you rise to the top and you keep turning in great work, then you're like, oh, hey, I got an assignment to Guam next weekend, or now I'm going over there. And the people that don't do so good get to stay back and shoot autopsies, right? So that's sort of Darwinism, applied to creativity.
That's great. So you did that. Tell, is there any interesting kind of stories you can tell us about that before we move on to the next stage?
I
Any?
got done. Come on, I've been doing this forever. So here's the one story that photographers, or basically anybody can sympathize with. What was it? I think it was like my first, I had just gotten back from training. So still a brand new photographer, still trying to understand things. And remember, we're shooting film back then. This is pre-digital. So yeah, there was this aircraft, I forget, it was some kind of experimental aircraft or whatever had landed on the runway at Yokota Air Base because planes would stop through there from time to time. It's a military, I think it was a Marine aircraft or something. And they're like, yeah, the air crew wants shots of the plane and they want a group shot of themselves in front of the plane with the base in the background and all this to show that they landed in Tokyo or whatever. So, Johnson, you go out there and shoot that. I'm like, okay. All right. So I go out, I grab my camera, I grab the film, go out there to the runway, I get everybody assembled, I do all the shots. It's the middle of the day, by the way, because the only time we could do this for some reason was like high noon. So sun is beaming down. It just looks, not ideal conditions for a group shot. Very contrasty. So I do the shot. I'm like, whatever. I can make it look good in the enlarger, which is the equivalent to Lightroom these days, right? So, I do the shots. I go back, a day or so later. I'm like, okay, got to process that film. Let me process it. And remember, I shot. This was photographed on slide film. So I photographed on slide film. So I had to process it myself using a little can and chemicals and all that. Processed it. And then I realized, actually, when I was rolling the film into the can, I realized that I had used tungsten balanced film instead of colored negative film. So if the photographers in the group will understand that tungsten film is designed to expose for tungsten light, which is inherently orange, right? So it's very orangish in hue, especially when shot exposed with daylight. And that's what I did. So I go out there, I come back, and I just have this orange strip of nonsense, right? I'm like, oh, and there's no chance for a reshoot because they're gone now. They've taken off and gone to their next thing. No chance for a reshoot. I'm like, what to do? What to do? So I saved it by saying, I told the client, the air crew, I was like, you know what? I assumed you guys wanted black and white. So I printed everything in black and white and made it look amazing and set everything up and gave them extra prints and the whole 9 yards. And I was a hero. Nobody ever asked for color versions of those prints, not even one time. So yeah, that was adventure one of like 1,000 that I had, during the career.
That's great. That's great. Using your creativity to save your butt.
I was sweating bullets. I was like, oh my God, what do you do? What do you do? I mean, there's no way to fix it in the enlarger. I mean, you could print that thing all day long using filters after filters, standing on one leg, praying, all this. You're never going to get a decent, properly balanced color print from tungsten tungsten film exposed to daylight. It's not going to happen. So yeah, but black and white, it came out kind of okay. It was still a little weird, but it was okay. And they got it. I think some of those guys still have those prints to this day.
Well, as long as they're happy, right?
That's it. Customer was happy, so I was happy.
So I imagine these guys, the military, must have a huge archive of stuff, right? So did you get involved with that at all, like just sort of managing that or being part of that, like
N-
and
No, not at all.
no, no.
Once it left us, we were all of us were top secret, had top secret security clearances. So we shoot all kinds of things. Yeah, I spent time inside Cheyenne Mountain, in Wyoming, just all over the place in Denver. We've been to the Air Force Academy, all over, shooting things that normal civilians will never see. And we got to photograph it. But once you photograph it and that film leaves and you deliver it to the person, whether it be, sometimes they just want the film and sometimes they want film and prints and proofs and all that. But once you deliver it, it's out of your hands. You have no idea where it's going to go. And then later in my career, we were transmitting things. So we'd be out in the middle of the field. Remember, this is all pre all this amazing technology we have now, even the things that we're talking on now, these iPhones. But we would deploy into the middle of nowhere, maybe on an exercise or something, and we'd have to set up full-on satellite uplinks. These little things that look like giant tr clothing trunks. You'd unfold it and unfold a giant umbrella, find the satellite, get everything lined up, and then you'd be able to FTP your images to a server. And we were FTPing images to the Pentagon, right? So we'd be out in the middle of nowhere taking pictures, taking our camera back, scanning we had processing the film, or actually this was when digital showed up. So we're shooting with Nikon DCS 420 digital cameras, and we would shoot it, download our sub 1 megapixel photos, and upload them to the Pentagon. And that was it. We'd never see anything of them after that. We have to delete the local files, and then once they confirmed receipt, and that was it. So that was the first step towards this world that we live in now, where I can shoot a photo with my phone that looks amazing and edit it and share and print it and do all the good things.
Did you get to keep any of the photos at all from that period? I mean, it sounds like you had to send everything in, but did you manage to keep any?
Yeah, yeah, some of the photos they would declassify, and they became public domain, or at least release them to the artist, the photographer. So yeah, I have a bunch of those. Most of them are of rocket launches or space launches from Vandenberg Air Force Base. So, that was an adventure there, because this was before, obviously SpaceX getting pretty good at, launching and landing rockets. I mean, this was before landing rockets, right? But this was when we were still kind of figuring out how to launch. So, so as a result, there was a bunch of them that exploded, and I, was able to get some photos of those. The explosions were classified, of course, so those all went away. I don't have any of those, but some of the launches that happened, I was able to keep, in my personal collection.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, you should share that with us if you can in some way. Like maybe take a couple and throw it in the Discord for us. It'd be great to
I
see it.
I will, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that'd be awesome. And so okay, then how does that end? And I mean, did you want to leave, or you said you got discharged, or what was? And then how did you end up in marketing out of all things?
Yeah, I've always wanted to be in marketing. I really like the idea behind like persuasion, and using words and creative to persuade people to do things, in a positive way, not in a negative sort of mind control way, but in a positive way to kind of, it just always intrigued me that you could do A, B, and C, or press these certain triggers and make people, influence people to do things and spend money. So that was exciting to me. So I've always wanted to do that. But the transition from the military to civilian, I was basically at the end of my second tour. I did two tours, two 4-year tours. So at the end of the second one, was around the time that the dot-com explosion was about happening. So you can, to put a ring on that tree or to timestamp it, this was when Yahoo was just getting started. Like Yahoo, I think had maybe 50 to 100 employees at the time. And I moved to, I had a choice. I was at Vandenberg Air Force Base, so it was at the end of my tour. So it was kind of that decision-making time. A, do I stay in for another 10 and retire, and do the whole retirement thing, or do I get out, roll the dice, and go to Silicon Valley and, do the stuff that I really want to be doing? At that point, I couldn't see myself doing another 10 years in the military. So I was like, you know what, I'm getting out, I'm joining the civilian workforce. And it was an honorable discharge. So after the end of that second tour, I left, I they basically, when your tour is over and you get out and you haven't done anything wrong and you've performed your job accordingly, you're discharged honorably. So I was discharged honorably and, went to Silicon Valley, and here I am still.
Sounds great. So, and what was the transition like? So, you let's say you ended up interviewing, I guess, and got a job at Yahoo, and then what was different from private sector and marketing in particular that surprised
Yeah,
you?
yeah, the interesting thing was the I mean, some things were different and some things were the same. So when I joined Silicon Valley, I joined the San Jose Mercury News, like I mentioned, which is a newspaper, which is a union shop, right? So they had many of the same rules that military have to deal with. So a lot of the same restrictions, but obviously no uniform and freedom, right? You're not going to jail if you don't show up for work the next day, kind of thing. But the main transition points for me were just kind of understanding what there's in the military. There's a path of ascension. If you do the right thing, you do your job, you do A, B, and C, by this date on this year, your pay will increase by this percentage amount and you'll have this rank, et cetera, right? So you can kind of plan your trajectory. In the civilian world, it's not necessarily that, right? In the civilian sector, it's merit based. It's not just, if you don't get any DUIs, you're going to get promoted, right? In the civilian world, you need to be exemplary and you need to do things better than everybody else and to the nth degree, and be personable and all that on top of it, and then raises, etc., may come, or you start your own thing, and we know where that leads. So yeah, it's different. I miss the military, some parts of it, some part of, mainly the structure, and just not that I need that kind of structure, but the structure is liberating from a creative standpoint. If you don't have to worry about, it's almost like being an entrepreneur. When you're an entrepreneur, you're in charge of everything. You're in charge of your benefits, you're in charge of payroll, bookkeeping, and the product and marketing, copywriting, all of that stuff. I'm my IT guy. I build the website. I'm the host of the show. I do every single bit of it. In the military, it was refreshing or liberating in some ways because your area of responsibility is relatively narrow. So as long as you do that narrow thing amazing, which you can do, right? As long as you do that narrow thing amazingly, then your job is done, as long, and it's fun. But all bets are off when you go to war, right? So all the things we're talking about are the military world in a civilian, non-conflict atmosphere. When a conflict happens, then all bets are off. It's like, show up on that runway with all your stuff, and we're taking off at 3 a.m. Where are we going? I don't know. We'll tell you when we get there, it's that kind of feel, and you're at a moment's notice. There's always that pendulum hanging above your head that at a moment's notice they could call me and I'm gone. I got to leave my family and I don't know if I'm coming back. But and obviously it's not like that in civilian world.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. Look, I want to jump actually to the podcast then because we're gonna run to the hour at one point, so I want to make it shorter. So tell us about how this weekend photo kind of started, and why did you start doing it, and what was your vision for it back then, and sort of how it evolved.
Yeah, yeah. So this week in photo started about 11-ish years ago. And it was started by two really good friends of mine, a guy by the name of Alex Lindsay and another guy by the name of Scott Bourne, who are still active doing all kinds of cool things. And it started back when podcasts were like, what's a podcast? No one knew what a podcast was, and it started basically experimental. Like, what? Let's just throw a bunch of people online, audio, and start talking about photography, and see if anybody wants to listen. So they started that thing while I was actually working in marketing at Adobe. So they would call me on from time to time as the Adobe guy to talk about Lightroom and Photoshop or what latest release happened or whatever. And I would show up and be the corporate guy and talk, etc. And then through a series of events, they decided they didn't want to do the podcast anymore. And I decided, oh, and at that time, Adobe had laid off, I think it was around somewhere around 500 to 700 people in one day. They had this giant, massive layoff, and I got swept up in that. So I'm like, holy crap. I go home after the whole HR meeting, and I'm like, oh, what am I going to do now? I don't know. Am I going to do the whole resume thing? And I'm just licking my wounds. I'm like, you know what? So I sat down in my little home office and I wrote this business plan and I called it Operation Fireproof because I felt like I just got fired. Even though it was a mass layoff, I felt like I just got fired and I had no control of it. Nobody knew it was coming. There was no warning. It was, hey, you got meetings, you got 12 meetings this afternoon and now you have zero. It was that kind of deal. So I was like, this is unacceptable. This can never happen again. So, so I built Operation Fireproof, where, is basically This Week in Photo and a bunch of other initiatives that were designed to all be self-sustaining. If any one of them went away for whatever reasons, the weight could be borne by the ones that were remaining. So I didn't want to be in a situation where all of my eggs were in one basket, i.e., one main company, and if that company goes away, then I'm basically screwed. I didn't want to be in that situation again. So I built it and I took This Week in Photo property, I took it over essentially and built it from it was nothing at the time. I mean, it was a popular podcast, it was growing and people were enjoying it, but it had nowhere near the size of audience that it has now. I mean, we're, orders of magnitude larger. It had no social presence, no Twitter, no Instagram, no website, none of that stuff. So I said, in this downtime, I'm going to build this thing and use my marketing horsepower that I've, learned at Adobe and Apple and focused it on my own thing. Let's see if I can build something. So I built it. I built thisweekinphoto.com and built the podcast and launched the whole thing and all the things that go along with it infrastructure wise, whether it's the email list backend, the WordPress infrastructure that's hosting on, the shopping cart, the affiliate piece of it. I put all the different pieces in place, designed the logo, all all of it, put it all in place, and then launched it. And I'm the host of it, right? So it was more of an experiment to see if I could do it, right? Can I do this thing? Can you build something from scratch that lives virtually and have it generate enough revenue to, be happy and thrive, not just survive? So, so I built it and launched it, and it's been going since then. And over time, it's grown to a point. I think it was maybe, and we're in 2022. It was maybe 5 years ago ish that it hit a point where I started getting messages from media outlets because of the size of the brand and the reach and all that. I started getting messages from media outlets of, "Hey, we're launching a new camera. Do you want one?" You know, and all these things started happening. I'm like, wow, I'm a real boy now. People are, really paying attention to this thing. And now it's a well-known brand in the photography industry. And yeah, I'm excited. It's really Yeah, it's really inspiring for myself, just internally, that I was able to build something from scratch and then people look at it and recognize it as something valuable now, and I'm able to help get the word out for these different smaller and larger companies and individuals that I interview all the time, because I can get people and put them in front of a large audience and help them push their agenda or their project or their NFT or whatever, right? I have the power to do that now, which is basically grown from a seed into what it is now.
No, that's inspiring to us too, Frederick. I mean, I'm definitely impressed with what you've done. And I think it must be said also, it's not just a podcast, right? So you also run a community as well, right? Can you tell us a bit about that as well?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it started as a podcast, and it'll always be a podcast, as its sort of main vein DNA, right? It's a podcast, and I'm a podcaster now when I put on that hat. But it has sort of evolved into a community. So there's a thriving private community associated with it. It's a paid community. I can tell you why I made it paid, but there's a paid community of photographers that I'd manage. And then there's also a educational resource, a store. And then we also do workshops and events, live events, and I do public speaking, all of that stuff. And it's all come from the main seed of just getting in front of the mic and, you know, talking about the stuff that I love anyway, the photography side of it. So then the interesting thing about this DAP is it this world, the world of photography and the gear and the technique and the software and all that stuff, and even this crypto NFT stuff, it's in a constant state of morphing, right? It's always new, right? There's no like, oh, I've been doing this for 10 years and I've learned everything there is to know. It's more of there's always something new to be excited about. There's always a new feature and software to experiment with. There's always a new camera to lust after, or a new lens, or some lights, or a computer, or whatever. So it's always fresh, and that's what keeps me in the world.
So yeah, so let's talk about that actually, NFTs and light a little bit, because I mean, obviously that is your new gig now, and we obviously have things we have to discuss, and I think it might be a good idea to do it here live. Why not? So can you share what we've discussed in terms of the different areas that we want to do, and how do you see those playing out, the podcast and the spaces and all that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is exciting. So, one of the things that I've always wanted to do was sort of take an idea like you've had and you've built this light thing, right? So take that and take what I know about podcasting and marketing and all the things that we just talked about, and focus them without the meandering path of learning that I've been on for the last 10 years. So I've built up this body of knowledge on how to do this stuff. I'm like, what if you take that and just laser focus it on something and build something from the ground up that's amazing and brand new and relevant for today? What would that look like? So and then you and I got to talking, and that's where the genesis of this light podcast came from. So my vision for the podcast is is a forum for the light artists to basically tell the world about themselves, right? So tell the world about what motivates them as artists, as photographers. Why are they excited about this whole NFT space, and what is exciting about it to them? What are they going to do next? All the things, right? With the main goal to well, multiple goals, right? So to inform others about what these artists are doing, and also to get others excited about what's possible, right? And get them enthusiastic or enthused about what's possible in this space, because others that are just like them are doing it. So that was one piece of it, to do that and build it into a world-class podcast property under the Light brand, which is what we're building right now. And then this piece of it, frankly, what we're doing right now, the Light Hour is an adjunct to the podcast. I don't know if you want to call it an adjunct, maybe it's a sister to the podcast. It's a different format, it's more informal. It's it's more inclusive and community based. Anybody can raise their hand and jump in, so I want to get to a stride where, and you and I have discussed this, that where there's the podcast, and then the person that's on the podcast may follow up into a Twitter space, and we'll hang out here and do all the things, and then whatever, right? So sort of building this engine of content that then lives on the site that we were building right now, the adjunct to the light.art site. So we're building that piece where this archive of amazing content and interviews will live with all the light artists. And I think at the end of the day, we'll end up with this huge catalog of discussions and content. And maybe there'll be some other pieces of content in there as well. But initially, it'll be this amazing content of discussions with artists from all parts of, corners of the globe and all genres of photography that are tied together with this one thing, which is their love of photography and, their interest and joy about the NFT space. So it's going to be fun. It's really exciting. We're down the path already, right? So I think that I've interviewed a good 4 people so far. And we're gonna, that's which is going to be the start. And we haven't even launched the podcast yet. So once the podcast launches, it will have a number of discussions in the feed to start with. And then, there'll be a cadence of probably 1 or 2 a week after that as we get going, filling the feed. So yeah, it's fun. It's exciting.
So yeah, when can we expect that? When do you think we're going to be able to listen in? I had the preview of one already, and I loved it, but I think people are looking forward to it.
Yeah, we can. I'm, me, man. I'm a lean in kind of military rush forward type guy. So I'm ready to launch this thing. I think we can aggressively or even conservatively launch it maybe in a week or so, maybe 2 weeks max. We'll be ready to push it out. I'm editing. I'm actually on my screen right now. I'm editing the last of that first 4. So we'll have 4 in the can that are ready to push out to iTunes and Spotify and the Google Play and all the places. And once it's out, then people are, giving feedback and enjoying it, and we're adjusting. Then it's a snowball rolling, or what was our our mascot? So it is a
The Dung
ball
Beetle.
roll. I don't know if you want to tell everybody what we were playing around with as a mascot. So no, it'll be good. It's good. Yeah, something in a couple of weeks.
I want to get, if anybody has questions, by the way, or wants to kind of, just say hi, please come up on the space. I think it just, while you're doing that, one question that I had was, how do you see the collectors sort of playing into that audience or as part of the podcast and the sort of the media empire that you're building for Light now?
I want the collectors to have equal standing with the artists up there, because it's a conversation that is collectors and creators, collectors and artists. So I want to have both of those sides of the conversation informing each other. So if they're artists watching this and they're curious about what collectors think or what collectors are into or what issues that collectors have, I want to explore those issues on the show so that artists can see that, and then vice versa from a collector standpoint. I want collectors to know and understand the motivations that go into creating this art and some of the challenges. And it's not going to be the irrationally exuberant hour about NFTs and all this stuff. It'll be everything will be positive, obviously, but we won't be shying away from the tough topics, kind of like you were talking about with limited editions or, those sorts of things. So we'll talk about those in the end, as we build this thing. But, it's more about inspiration and positivity as we march forward.
Very cool. So we got a couple people joining here. Benism, can you unmute yourself? Yeah, please let us know if you have anything.
Hey, no, I just tuned in. I thought I'd come up and say hello. I don't know if I've met any of you before, so it's always great to make new acquaintances here. And yeah, I'm just enjoying the conversation.
Hey, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Very
What's up,
cool.
guys?
Yeah, man. There's so much stuff to do with what we're building, and it's almost like, there's so much opportunities where to start and where to focus on. So yeah, I'm excited about this whole thing.
Hey, Johnny, welcome.
Hey, can you guys hear me? So my AirPods are a little messed up.
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome. Frederick, I just want to say, man, it was cool listening in on your story with being back in the military and everything. I had no idea that that was your sort of like origin story. It's really fascinating. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, yeah, that's the origin story. There's a lot more details in there which we can go into later, but it was
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure there's tons of stories that you've got.
some not.
Hours. Exactly. But no, this is cool. I think I'm interested to hear more about what you've got cooking up with the sort of like collector artist interview series. I was listening to you sort of like talking about the dichotomy between the two, and it is always interesting because you can't have one without the other, and so we're always sort of living in this constant tension that I think is interesting. And when you see how fast and cyclical things are and move on Twitter when there's a certain hot topic, and then everybody rushes into the Twitter spaces and has that topic conversation, and
Yeah.
it feels like it just sort of like flies by. But I think there's something to be said about sort of having like a round table discussion that I think would open up more sort of an in-depth conversation versus, just kind of following through on like what the hot topic or trend is that day. So I'm curious to see how that goes for you. I'll definitely be watching out for it.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah. I think it'll go well because I think there's a need for that kind of just sort of, I know the Twitter Spaces by definition is just, discourse about a particular topic. But I want to where I think I have a good, strong skill set is in managing conversations with multiple people involved and sort of round tabling that conversation to get a good idea of or an average of what the discussion topic is from various perspectives. So I think we can do that, and then of course these will be recorded and available on demand later on the site and in the podcast feed, etc. So as we build these, I think we'll end up with a nice library of topics. Not necessarily diving into whatever the zeitgeist in Twitter right now is about NFTs or whatever controversy that's happening. We may touch on that, but more of foundational evergreen stuff, and some of that will be in there as well. So it should at the end of the day we'll end up with a nice catalog, or like Dap is saying, a nice empire of content that that we can pull from.
Yeah, I like that because you're going to end up, ultimately it draws a bigger sort of long-term audience in that way because, like you said, it's like kind of hard to jump into these Twitter spaces, over and over, bouncing between multiple different ones, and you kind of hear like similar topics being talked about, and then you kind of have, you know, people jumping in and sharing their 2 cents, jumping out, going to the next one, and jumping. It kind of gets either super repetitive or it's just too sporadic to follow. And I think there's something to be said about, what you're just saying is like the more roundtable approach where you can actually move the conversation and you have, pieces that you want to touch on and topics and all that sort of, preemptively thought out. I think that kind of thing is super crucial. What was the original one that you brought up earlier? You have a podcast. I was going to write that down. I couldn't remember what it was called.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's still going. It's called thisweekinphoto.com. And
Okay, cool.
that's This Week in Photo. You can just search for it, you'll find it.
Awesome.
Yeah, just to add to you're saying, Johnny, I think I've been in the space now for a while, and what you see is new people come in with the same questions that we may have had 6 months ago, and then they're like, oh, what about this, or they didn't know, and we're like, well, there was a whole thing in the space like 6 months ago. We discussed this and we had spaces for like 3 weeks, and the new people coming in, were not part of that, right? They didn't get that conversation. So having a library of evergreen content and recording these and having the podcast also will help people who are coming in new to have a a resource for them to use in learning about the NFT space, right? Which I think it's very important for us to have in order to grow, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and as things evolve and things change, we'll talk about them and add them to, add those conversations to the library and keep going. It'll be fun. And I think the content in a lot of ways, Dap and I and Elia, of course, will guide what the content is editorially and what the different directions we want it to go. But I think for the most part, the community itself, whether on Twitter or in the Discord, will guide what needs to be covered in subsequent episodes. So yeah, it'll be fun.
Great. So
Yeah,
Frederick,
oh.
go ahead, Johnny.
I just was going to say it kind of reminds me of, the difference between like the actors roundtable where you sit and watch like, Adam Driver and Shia LaBeouf and Robert De Niro, all these like heavy hitter actors, sitting around for an hour and a half talking about various topics that maybe aren't even necessarily NFT related. But then like the alternative version of that I, think of with like the Twitter spaces is, a celebrity tour talking about a specific movie. And it almost is like it's the difference between like a shilling environment and then like a very laid back, casual conversation between, the heavy hitters in a specific industry. But that was the only other thought about it.
Yeah, and then that's a good point because the other piece is that we're that's on the list of things to do is creating some sort of inspirational training that dives in at different levels to what we're going to be talking about in the NFT space. And Dap, maybe you can dive into that a little bit and what your vision for the training piece of it is that we're building.
Yeah, I think again, the idea of having evergreen content to onboard people, and it's not just onboard people. I think also advanced topics, right? Things that would be helpful for the community today, whether it's on understanding smart contracts, the difference between them. We have Will Entrican in our team, who's the lead author of the ERC 721 standard. So he might do something for us. And we might do. We are actually going to do soon a marketing 101 for photographers. So I think a lot of people have questions. How should I kind of market myself? Just some principles and things from experts. And if we can build a library of that for our community, and I think that will be a success. I think I would consider that to be a success. That people have something that they can go to when they're trying to either enter the space or up their game in the space, whether they are photographers or collectors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you're saying,
That's awesome.
there's always the same, just like in any industry, just like when people first get excited about photography, right? And someone tells them, "Hey, you should do this stuff professionally or whatever." And people have that first initial spark. They always tend to have the same set of questions, right? What camera should I buy? What lenses? I don't know what my genre is. How do I figure out what my genre is? What if I want to sell stuff? Where do I sell it? Should I start an email account, or an email list? Do I need a website or can I just use Instagram? Right? All these questions happen over and over again, and to the extent that we can tackle those questions in training and answer that stuff at the beginning, I think it'll be a huge service to the industry overall.
Huge. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yep.
So Frederick, I think we're up to the hour. So it's my turn to be host today. So I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys. I hope I survived. I'm not about to take your podcast over anytime soon. But any last words from you and that you wanted to share?
Yeah. Parting thoughts. Yeah, just when the podcast launches, we're gonna of course drop it here on Twitter and in the Discord, and I'll be promoting it on my other podcast, This Week in Photo, and to the email list there. So just keep an eye out for it. And above all, feedback. Let us know what kind of content that you want seen in there. What you think about the episodes and the format, all those things, because this is the format and the nature of podcasting and everything that we're doing in this digital world is fluid, right? So making changes and adjusting as we go is going to be the name of the game, especially for this first year. It'll be the name of the game as we start releasing these episodes. And then 2023 will look completely different than what we're doing right now based on input from the crowd, right? So, it's got to be flexible, got to change as the market changes and evolves. So will we. We will change and grow along with it.
Great. Well, thank you again, Frederick, and thanks Johnny and Benism for joining us. And yeah, we'll see you guys on Thursday.
All right. Cool, man.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody.